Round of applause for making it on time. My name is Danish Seth. I'm going to be hosting this event for you. And it's wonderful that we actually today are going to be witnessing the launch of a report on mental health in our country. 7 years ago, when I was going through a tough time in my life, there was no talk about mental health. Nobody was really, even particular about bringing it out to people and, to tell them that, hey, there could be a problem. So I mustered the courage. I picked the phone up, called a doctor, went down, sat down and spoke with him for about an hour, cried, bawled like a child, and then he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, I really wish I could help you, but I'm the orthopedician." 6-7 years later, here we are, and, big credit to the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation. Deepika's vision through her own experiences and her journey. And here we are. So ladies and gentlemen, let's really have a big round of applause for all the wonderful work that they've been doing so far. Let's have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. I was just looking up, a couple of things that they've done in the past, and it ranges from things like a campaign called "You Are Not Alone." This was for the students and teachers. Dubara Pucho. There was this rural mental health project in Davangere that covers an ongoing treatment for about 800 individuals. And I think the greatest thing that one can do is to serve the people around, and the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation has been doing that successfully. Today, of course, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be witnessing the launch of a survey that they put together. And since the occasion is this big, we have some esteemed guests with us whom I'd like to welcome right now. To begin with, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for our chief guest, Mr. Sanjeeva Kumar, Additional Secretary, Health, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Welcome, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to talk about this morning, to tell us about the report, to tell us about the findings so far, and the work that's been done so far, I'd like to welcome on stage the director of the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation. Please put your hands together for Anisha Padukone. Welcome.
Thank you, Danish. That's really kind of you. Respected Chief Guest, Mr. Sanjeev Kumar, Additional Secretary Health, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, donors and supporters of the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation, other distinguished guests and members of the media. It is indeed an honor and a great pleasure for me to warmly welcome you all to this morning's event. It is great to see so many of you here today. I believe this reflects the increased attention and the engagement that the topic of mental health is receiving here in India. It was exactly 3 years ago, almost to this day, on the 21st of March 2015, that our founder, Deepika Padukone, went on national television and spoke about her struggles with depression, as well as her recovery from it. For those of you who may have watched that interview, you may recall that Deepika also spoke about her intention to use her experience and create something that would help others like her who may be struggling with depression. The same intention to create a platform to contribute and change the narrative around mental health in India resulted in the launch of the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation on the 10th of October 2015, which is also celebrated as World Mental Health Day every year. A lot has happened since then, both at the foundation and elsewhere in the public domain here in India. Mental health and well-being have slowly but surely bubbled to the surface and become a part of many conversations in a more forthright manner with political leaders, business leaders, decision makers, parents, teachers, the young and the old in our cities, towns, and villages, and rightly so. In our journey so far at the foundation, we have had the opportunity to receive great encouragement from so many different organizations and people. Many of the people we have approached have been very forthcoming in their support, either through donations, sponsorships, their time, valuable advice, and other contributions. So many others have proactively approached us and offered their help. I'm delighted to see some of our donors here today in the audience, and I would like to thank them for being with us. The media has also been extremely supportive of our work right from the start and partnered with us in our journey. We are extremely grateful to you for your continued support. Ladies and gentlemen, while there have been several pieces of research on the mental health disease burden in India, there have been very few studies, if any, that measure mental health literacy in the Indian context. But why measure mental health literacy? We felt that building knowledge about mental health would be an indispensable element in helping the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation's twofold mission to build awareness and reduce the stigma surrounding mental illness in India. This is the conceptual framework that inspired the foundation to commission a unique survey on the public attitudes and perceptions towards mental health. We hope that going forward, the learnings from this survey will lay the foundation for future research and development of programs in the mental health sphere. We are so glad that all of you present here today have taken the time and made the effort to be with us as we proudly launch the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation 2018 National Survey Report, How India Perceives Mental Health. I do hope that you will find the next couple of hours you spend with us insightful and a worthwhile investment of your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anisha. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about mental health and when you usually ask people around you, hey, what do you know about mental health? Or if you tell someone, hey, I'm not feeling fine, the most common answers are go for a holiday. I don't know why. The moment you tell them you have a mental health problem, they want to send you on a holiday for some reason. Right? Or just tell you what, just leave Facebook, you'll be fine. Sleep well. Just get up in the morning, eat 2 parathas and go to work. You will be killing it that day. So we actually, went out and asked people about their perception about mental health. And they had some very interesting things to say. I know I'm making it sound fun, but I've been told it's a serious video. So ladies and gentlemen, very seriously, let's play the video. Please do watch it.
Comes to know when it's not very prominent, even though everyone is a victim to it in one way or the other. We just don't show it out.
As in, when you talk about mental health, it's something that you need to be reminded of sometimes when you have a conversation. Like, yeah, we do, even with friends or when you're sitting or hanging out, you do talk about these things. Like when we read about when she launched the campaign, Dubara Pucho and all that. So yeah, that became a topic of conversation, but then in general it doesn't come up.
Yeah.
I'm a health worker and I'm finding a lot of people are suffering with what you call mental illnesses. And I can say by what you call a sure economy and all the things, but by research I am saying that almost 60% of people are suffering with depression.
Society as a whole, people are ignorant.
Right.
People, not everybody knows, and on top of it, nobody cares.
डिप्रेशन में लोग आ जाते हैं कभी कदार. इतना माहौल, इतना प्रदूषण हो चुका, पॉपुलेशन है हर जगह. कहीं पे भी आप जाएंगे देखेंगे कि धूल मिट्टी और गाड़ियों की प्रॉब्लम से इतना डिप्रेशन हो जाता है कि उसकी वजह से मानसिक रोग हो जाता है.
They will be away from people. They will be separating themselves from others. They don't like speaking and they don't like communicating with others. They want to be isolated. They don't want to enjoy the life.
जैसे मुझे लगता है डिप्रेशन के से वही ज़्यादा होते हैं जो ज़्यादा या तो अपने आप को बिजी नहीं कर पाते, मे बी जो फ्री ज़्यादा है.
उनका बिहेवियर यही कुछ ऐसे वैसे बातें करना या कुछ वैसी चीज़ें, गंदगी वाली चीज़ें उठाना, ये कुछ वैसे लगता है देखने में तो समझ में आता है कि हाँ मेंटली डिस्टर्ब है, या कुछ फालतू की बातें करना, तब पता चलता है.
The word psychiatry is the biggest what you call taboo in our what you call culture.
Yeah.
It's the biggest taboo in our culture. We don't go to the psychiatrist. We don't consult a psychiatrist. I will go to a neurologist. Okay. Yeah, it seems that it's a normal thing for me, neurology. But if a question arises about psychiatry, that's the biggest taboo in my culture.
If any person is under depression, the particular family members, the friends, the people who are really close to your heart, these are lots of important in your life. They are the they are the soulmates for you, and to bring out of depression, not even, I don't think psychologists, counselings, they are secondary. The first thing is coming in, priority is family.
I'll try to solve myself. If that doesn't work, I'll go to my family, and if needed, I'll prefer psychiatrist.
A psychiatrist or a counselor?
A counselor. Because my mom is my biggest counselor.
Of course, there are a lot of psychiatrists, but I don't think that it's that much in fashion. If a person is referred to a psychiatrist, he starts thinking that he is mad or somewhat. So it's not in a good channel or good. It's not. I don't think that it's that in fashion.
In the last few years, there's been quite a change in India. There's less stigma, although it continues to exist. I think people are much more aware about what mental health is and why it's so important.
In my experience, one of the most important hindrances is parents and families primarily refuse to acknowledge that there is an individual who's suffering.
The family plays a very key role in recovery. If the family is not supportive, then it becomes very difficult for a person to acknowledge that they have a problem. Often they feel even worse, ashamed of having a problem, maybe guilty of that they have an issue, unless it's acknowledged by the family.
Society on the whole has kind of created a stereotypical, typical image that mental health is that you've lost your mind. And along with losing your mind, you're completely dysfunctional, you're violent, and therefore it's almost like you're written off.
Actually, I was only aware that I had a problem after shock treatment was given to me. But then I accepted further help later, professional help, when I found the gentleness and the understanding that I needed in that vulnerable state. And then I worked with that. Well, the most hurtful thing is when somebody told me they would put me into an asylum. So yes, that was painful. But also propelled me into being stronger.
The biggest challenge I faced was I found out that there's such a lack of awareness. So I was running a very successful company at that point of time, and I was working with the brightest minds in available out there. First thing they said was, oh, we have to keep it under wraps. We have to conceal this, otherwise we're going to lose contracts. What are the clients going to say? So we have to hush it up till you figure out what's wrong with you. Snap out of it, get over it. Go for a movie, you'll be fine by evening. So these are the kind of reactions I got. I'm extremely even frightened to even imagine what would have happened to me if I have not sought professional help. I don't know, I might not have been alive.
I have known the pain that surpasses pain. I have known the joy that it unveils. The pain and the joy cohabit in my heart to distill a wine of equal parts.
Thank you for the applause, ladies and gentlemen. When I came in, nobody clapped for me, but now you did. No, I know it's for the video. Hard-hitting, right? But the reality is so strange. People say different things. I can't believe somebody actually said, "वो धूल मिट्टी से pollution से बहुत depression होता है." I think depression also sometimes you just feel really sad when you're standing in that traffic jam, no? But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, different people say different things, but it's only the ones who are researching and putting in time who really know what the reality and the truth of it is. So ladies and gentlemen, to share the truth and nothing but the truth, I'm going to invite on stage Chairperson, the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation, Miss Anna Chandy. Round of applause, everyone. Welcome, ma'am.
Good morning. Since the inception of the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation, we have always strived to push boundaries to create an inclusive India. What began as a single curiosity to understand the perceptions and attitudes held by Indian society towards mental health has now culminated in this one kind of a study. In a vast and diverse country such as India, it is imperative to understand the beliefs, attitudes, and prejudices held by individuals across the nation on mental health, mental illness, and their treatment. Therefore, the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation commissioned Kantar Public to conduct a survey to assess the awareness and attitudes towards mental health concerns. The survey was conducted across 8 cities, and responses were collected from a total of 3,556 individuals. Additionally, 12 members of the general public and 3 experts were probed extensively on their views on mental health to gain a deeper understanding about why people think and behave in the way they do. It appears that people perceive and seem to be aware of mental illness as those that have severe and chronic symptoms. They are not aware that mental illness has a broad spectrum. The survey used 22 attitude statements to understand the beliefs held towards people with mental illness. A cluster analysis was formed on these statements, and 3 groups of respondents emerged. One group, segment 1, demonstrated support for people perceived as having mental illness. Another group, segment 2, indicated higher awareness about mental health concerns, but were likely to display judgment towards people perceived as having mental illness. The third group, segment 3, consisted of individuals who showed the highest amount of stigma against people with mental illness. The analysis has further highlighted the importance of looking into stigma and awareness as linked but distinct ideas. To set a context for information that will be presented shortly, here are a few findings. Smaller cities like Kanpur and Patna were more likely to be inclusive of people with mental illness and more supportive of them seeking treatment. Larger cities like Mumbai and Hyderabad displayed some awareness about mental health, but showed higher amounts of stigma, with larger percentage describing mental illness using discriminatory words. Mental health was seen to be misunderstood by the general population of these cities as just symptoms of severe or chronic mental illnesses. A possible explanation is Gert Hofstad's theory on individualism versus collectivism. In individualistic cultures, the need of an individual is far more important than the need of the collective or society. Countries like the United States, UK, and several European countries are individualistic in nature. People from these cultures have very strong definitions of their individual likes, dislikes, goals, and aspirations. They are likely to define their identity. They're less likely to define their identity in terms of relationships that they have with others. In collectivist cultures, the needs of society are far more important than the needs of an individual. Countries such as India, Japan, Pakistan, and a lot of the Asian countries are collectivist in nature. People from these cultures are more likely to value societal goals, likes, and attitudes above their own. They are more likely to define themselves in terms of their relationships with others in their communities. Traditionally and historically, India is a collective society now slowly moving towards a more individualistic one. This transition is evident in the data that will be presented today. In larger cities like Mumbai and Hyderabad, we see a more dramatic shift towards individualism, possibly due to an increased amount of access to information and migrants' need for survival. However, smaller cities tend to retain their collectivist roots and are moving much more at a slower pace towards an individualistic society. Our conclusion is that we need to look at mental health more holistically, focusing both on decreasing stigma and increasing awareness by inculcating some collectivist practices into our more individualistic lifestyles. We may be able to shape the conversation to build an inclusive society that will provide support to people with mental illness and increase India's awareness about mental health concerns. Thank you.
Know about it? And how does what we know influence our behavior? WHO estimates that 20% of Indians will suffer from depression in their lifetime. This means 1 in 5 people. When the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation commissioned Kantar Public to study the issue of mental health in the country, some stark figures showed up. 40% of the society was labeling the mentally ill as crazy. 38% called them careless. And a whopping 47% thought of them as retarded. Deeper analysis of data revealed 3 sets of reactions towards mentally ill patients. While 27% believe that mentally ill people deserve an equal chance to prove themselves and should be a part of the society, 47% believe that mentally ill people should be kept away from the society. And lastly, 26% believe that people with a history of mental illness can be dangerous and harmful and are hence best left alone. In such an environment, patients fear being ridiculed or judged if found visiting a psychiatrist, and hence it is no surprise that only 54% of the people are likely to visit a doctor or counselor, even when they feel the need to do so. This leaves us with the key question of how to bring about a change. Mental health. How much do we really know about it? And how does what we know influence our behavior?
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you remember all the numbers. If you don't, we will not give you lunch. There's going to be an exam at the end of this. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard about the report. We've seen some findings, but what does this report look like? I want to see it. Do you want to see it? You don't have a choice. We'll still show it to you. Ladies and gentlemen, to unveil the report, I'm now going to invite on stage our chief guest, Mr. Sanjeeva Kumar, Additional Secretary Health, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. Welcome, sir. And I'd also like to invite on stage Deepika Padukone, Ms. Anna Chandy, and Dr. Shyam Bhatt. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, as our guests make their way up to the stage to unveil that report. Yes, 2 people don't have to clap, everybody can. Please put your hands together. Thank you very much. I'm going to request the guests to please take their seats, and Deepika, would love to hear from you as well. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar, for joining us. It was an honor having you here, and thank you for launching the report. Good morning, everyone. I'm extremely delighted to be here today and so glad that all of you could join us. I think for some of us who were present, you may recall that this was the very same venue 1.5 years ago that we gathered to unveil the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation's initiative Dobara Pucho, India's first nationwide public awareness campaign on mental health. The campaign sought to inspire all of us to become a little more sensitive towards the people around us, to look out for those who might have mental health issues and guide them in the right direction. The campaign was also aimed at increasing awareness and addressing the stigma around mental health. Taking that same narrative forward is where the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation's 2018 National Survey report, How India Perceives Mental Health, fits in. The survey has revealed extremely important insights that we believe will be of immense value and interest to policymakers, mental health professionals, and other stakeholders in India's healthcare ecosystem. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to also highlight some of the Foundation's other initiatives. At the Foundation, we believe in focusing on fewer programs but deliver larger impact. And I'm proud to talk about the progress we have made in the last 3 years. We run the You Are Not Alone school awareness program for adolescent students and teachers in both urban and rural sectors. This program has already covered approximately 65,000 students and 11,000 teachers across 6 states and 5 languages. That's English, Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, and Gujarati. In our effort to help create resources, we also run a sensitization program on mental health for general practitioners. This program aims to sensitize general practitioners to be able to provide medication, but only in mild to moderate cases. So far, we have covered approximately 2,500 physicians who we hope will now be able to address mental health symptoms in individuals who approach them. Mental health is an issue that confronts not just urban India, but it's also a challenge in our towns and villages. Therefore, we have over the last 2 years run a rural mental health care program in the district of Davangere in Karnataka, providing free psychiatric treatment for approximately 800 individuals. In addition to these efforts, we amplify our outreach through engagement via media campaigns, events, and by using various digital platforms like our website and social media handles. The journey to those in need is long, but what gives us immense satisfaction is knowing that the stigma built around mental illness over the years is now slowly reducing. People are becoming more and more comfortable with accepting their feelings and seeking help and addressing their mental health concerns. We believe that this report that we have just unveiled today is another step in that direction. Over the next few years, the Foundation will continue to contribute towards building a more caring and inclusive society where those suffering from mental illnesses have a society that they can trust and rely on. India needs it, and the world needs it, now more than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepika. And ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker, who's going to be talking about the same subject and about what has been happening as well in the government. We suddenly see everyone's talking about it. So let's bring on stage our chief guest, Mr. Sanjeeva Kumar, Additional Secretary Health, Minister of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. Welcome, sir. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, sir.
Ms. Sena Chandy, Chairman of the Foundation, Director of the Foundation, Anima, Ms. Deepika Padukone, dignitaries present here. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Ms. Deepika Padukone and the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation on the release of their insightful report on public attitudes towards mental health in India. Mental health problems are much more than a medical ailment. They are embedded in social seclusion and violation of human rights. People suffering from mental health problems are marginalized in society because of stigmatizing attitudes, which originates from lack of empathy and awareness among communities. A large section of our society is still unaware about the fact that mental disorders can be abated with proper management and care. Social isolation faced by persons suffering from mental problem and their families pushes them further into despair by negatively affecting their family lives, lives of their parents, children, siblings, and partners. These misconceptions and misbeliefs are the biggest hurdle we as a society need to remove and circumvent in order to change the lives of millions. The magnitude of mental health and mental health problems could be easily exemplified by sheer numbers. Globally, 450 million people suffer from mental disorders, making mental health problem as the second leading cause of disability worldwide. In our country, the recently conducted National Mental Health Survey 2015-16 has shown that almost 10.6% of the adult population suffers from mental disorders, with 1 in 20 persons having depression. Mental illness affects individual lives in more than one way. 3 out of 4 persons with mental disorders had disabilities with significant impact on their work and family lives. For any single disorder, depression is responsible for the largest disease burden globally. World Health Organization has ranked depression as the single largest contributor to global disability. 322 million people worldwide suffer from depression. That is 4.4% of the world's population. Not surprisingly, depression has been identified as one of the most common disorders associated with suicides, with greatest impact on daily lives of people. We know mental health problems are multifarious in nature and have many underlying reasons which could be biological, social, emotional, and even environmental. We also need a similar multifarious approach to reduce the burden. The first step is to change our thinking and our attitudes. We need to make ourselves aware. Sharing of right and correct information is vital to create an environment where equity and equality is given utmost importance and help seeking is supported within a compassionate environment. Not only general public, but health professionals, police, social workers, judiciary, community leaders, all need to be sensitized about mental health issues. We should be talking in schools, colleges, workplaces, gram sabhas, and villages to remove misconceptions and myths. Recovery from mental health problems needs support from every quarter. Homes, communities, and families are the backbone of recovery from mental illness, and support provided by families and communities is invaluable to attain full recovery. It is therefore critical to support family members and caregivers who are providing emotional as well as psychological support through community empowerment and participation. There should be simultaneous efforts to ensure rehabilitation after recovery to enable continuity or revival of productive and fruitful life. As a community and as a country, we must collectively and strongly stand up for the rights of persons with mental health problems, their rights to humane living, right to living a productive life, right to make decisions, right to express, right to participate, and right to health care must be protected and propagated at every level. We have come a long way from Indian Lunacy Act 1912 to the present Mental Health Care Act 2017 through Mental Health Act 1987. The new regime, as enshrined in Mental Health Act 2017 not only brings forth a stronger and more robust legal scaffold, but a humane and patient-centric rights-based paradigm for mental health care in our country. It upholds, among other rights, right to access mental health care, right to community living, right to equality, right to confidentiality, and right to legal aid for persons with mental illness. A rigorous legal framework will augment ongoing efforts by the government to increase availability, accessibility, and coverage of equitable mental health care. It will give thrust to our endeavors to reduce stigma and will facilitate inclusion and integration of marginalized in mainstream society. Another important event has been the recent announcement of the National Health Policy. The policy, with explicit emphasis on universalization of quality healthcare service, will act as a strong impetus to improve mental health care. The policy focuses on grassroots level delivery of comprehensive health services through restructuring of sub-centers. These most peripheral hubs of health system would be strengthened to provide screening and basic management of mental health problems. The ongoing initiatives to train general cadre health professionals in providing basic mental health service will be expanded further to ensure availability of a standard and appropriate mental health across the country. We have our task cut out for ourselves. We have to work simultaneously to reduce the treatment gap for mental health care, to improve help seeking among patients, and to trigger change in perceptions. The National Mental Health Policy and the National Mental Health Programs are aiming to generate more human resource for mental health in the country, to provide both clinical and ancillary services. Mental health hospitals, government medical colleges are being supported for developing them as centers of excellence in mental health. However, this is not an end point, but a beginning of a transformation. We will all need to work together with revived and earnest rigor in order to convert the legal framework into meaningful impacts on the lives of millions. Collaboration will be the key to our success. I'm sure that the findings of the report on public attitudes towards mental health in India, commissioned by the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation, would make a seminal contribution to the ongoing initiatives in dealing with mental health issues in India. In the end, I would like to congratulate Ms. Deepika Padukone and her organization again for coming out and speaking openly on mental health issues which are often silenced in our society. I would also like to thank the Foundation for initiating a collaborative journey with the Government of India for working in the area of mental health in the country. We look forward to working for a paradigm in which people affected by mental health issues are not seen as anonymous, supine contributors to the statistics on mental health, not as objects, but the ones who have agency of their own and are subjects in their own right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation, I'm going to request Ms. Anna Chandy to please present you with a little memento on stage. Let's have a round of applause, everybody, once again. Thank you, sir, for taking your time out to being with us this morning. Thank you, sir. And sir is also going to be saying goodbye to us. Or does sir have time? Let's see, one second. I have it on my cue sheet. Okay, what's okay, all right, wait. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sanjeeva Kumar, Additional Secretary, Health, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. Round of applause once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir, and thank you to everybody else who joined, sir, this morning to be with us. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on, ladies and gentlemen. You see, we have 4 chairs on stage, which means you're going to have a panel that's going to be joining us, and they will discuss different things, and if you have questions, you can also ask them. And to moderate the panel, ladies and gentlemen, I want to invite on stage Dr. Shyam Bhatt. He's a psychiatrist and physician with postgraduate training and board certifications in psychiatry, internal medicine, and psychosomatic medicine. He has over 20 years of experience and has a special interest in an integration of Eastern and Western methods of healing. He is a founding trustee of the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Shyam Bhatt. Round of applause, please.
Thank you, Danish, and thank you to everybody for being here for this event, for this release of this very interesting, insightful report that will really help us as we move along. You know, sometimes we forget that behind numbers and statistics are real people. And not people, somebody else, but people like us, like you and me. Because if you look at the numbers, you realize that there is not a single family in India who will be untouched by some problems, some issues with mental health. Every single family will have at least one member who is going to go through something significant. And yet what we see through this report is that unfortunately there is still a lot of stigma, there's still a lot of misinformation, we still don't have enough awareness of this condition, as we are, even though we are at the cusp, the brink of a mental illness epidemic in this country. So it's really important for all of us to join together to increase awareness, to decrease stigma, and to really explore this report deeper, and to start identifying steps we can take. We have put together a panel discussion, and I'd like to now invite the panel members up on stage. I'd like to invite Dr. Soumitra Pathare. Dr. Pathare is a consultant psychiatrist and director of the Center for Mental Health Law and Policy at Pune. His primary interests are in the areas of mental health policy, scaling up mental health services, right-based care and legislation. He has provided technical assistance to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare Government of India in drafting India's fantastic new Mental Health Care Act 2017. Put your hands together for Dr. Soumitra. We have Siddhartha Swarup, who manages the social and behavior change portfolio at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Mr. Swarup has worked across 18 countries in 5 continents with a wide range of United Nations agencies, international NGOs, and multinational corporations, designing and leading programs for social shifts at scale. Welcome, Mr. Swarup. We have Anna Chandy, who is the chairperson of the foundation, and Anna, of course, has more than 18 years of experience in development work, counseling, coaching, and mentoring. She's the first certified transactional analyst from Asia, accredited by the International Transactional Analysis Association, with a specialization in counseling. And she, of course, serves as the chairperson for the Live, Love, Laugh Foundation. So you saw the report. 87% of people still hold, erroneous ideas about mental illness. If you ask people about mental illness, the first thing that seems to come to their mind is something very severe. They were talking about a person hallucinating, a person with a severe mental disorder, and of course that does afflict a small percentage of people, but we know that depression and anxiety affects as much as 20 to 25% of the population. It's a bit like if we had to ask someone, what do you think of physical illness, and the only thing they said is physical illness is either severe heart disease or cancer, and not the whole gamut of physical illnesses. We know we have they don't have the right understanding of physical illness. So that was a bit, in a sense, we hope to see a better attitude towards mental illness. We didn't see that. But what was your reaction, Dr. Pathare, when you saw this report? What was negative about this report? And could you find anything positive, something that would help us make a change?
Thanks, Shyam. I'm going to start off with a story because stigma is very close to home in a sense. And it affects not just people who have mental illness, but also people who work in the mental health sector. When I was growing up and I decided to do psychiatry, my father's only reaction was, for once, why can't you do something sensible? So implying that doing psychiatry wasn't a very sensible thing. My mother would say to her friends that he's doing post-graduation, not doing psychiatry. It's just not something you mention in polite company that you're doing psychiatry. And my kids have always avoided telling their friends. They just say he does international work, whatever that means. Don't actually say he's a psychiatrist. Deepika, you've done a great thing to reduce my stigma at home, because my niece and my kids suddenly look up to me because I'm meeting you. I have done something good in life because now I'm meeting Deepika Padukone, which is amazing. But I think it kind of, the reason for telling this story is because it just shows how much someone like you can make a difference to reducing stigma. In a sense, I'm now considered acceptable because I know you, which I wasn't. And this is at home. This is not just communities. But going back to the report, something that struck me in the report was, and a positive really, was that in the list of things that people referred to people with mental illness doing, violence and being violent was actually very low. Now that's very different, because across the world you find that people do report violence as a very high rate when they're talking about people with mental illness. So that's a positive that we should be building on. We should actually use that in the future. I'll highlight one negative, which I think is something that Anna mentioned in her talk too, that merely raising awareness does not reduce stigma, because if you see cities like Hyderabad and Pune and Bangalore, these are cities which potentially have high rates of awareness because there are more mental health professionals available. So that does not necessarily result in less stigma in those cities. So I think it's not just raising awareness, but the kind of awareness and what kind of awareness and how we do it. I think done badly, it will actually worsen stigma rather than improve stigma. So I think it's extremely important, not just what we do, but how we do it and what we are aiming at. Just knowledge does not necessarily make a difference. I mean, I think that's really the two highlights for me.
So that's interesting. In India, the positive is that rightfully, we don't perceive people with mental illness as being violent compared to people in the West. So even now, when you look at the West, many of them still think that mentally ill people commit acts of violence. And that's a real positive. As you said, we can build on that. But clearly, there's a long way to go in terms of making a change in our society. If we looked at the sort of segmentation, and we found that 25% of people in our society are what we call supporters, which means that they understand that people with mental illness are just like them. They have a problem that needs help. They can get help, and they're willing to support them. But 25% of the population were fearful of people with mental illness, and another 50%, didn't support people with, or said that they wouldn't provide the right kind of support to people with mental illness. And that's 75% of the population that we still need to change. Now, Siddharth Swarup, you've worked at scale. You worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so you have knowledge and experience about how to create change at a social level, at a large-scale level. Can you share your thoughts from your experience? What can we learn from that experience, and how can we apply that to our crisis of mental illness in this country, and how can we make a change?
Sure. I think the problem is really large, first of all. I think if you look at the context, I think about 50% people said that they in some way fear people who are living with mental illness. And if you compare that with the number of people who are afraid of a plane crash, it's 3 times. So 1/3 the people are afraid of dying from a plane crash than of people living with mental illness. So that's really a problem at scale. And what we've seen is that mental illness has a cause and effect relationship with almost every other aspect of life, whether it's agency that people have in their own life, the decisions that they're able to make, the kind of health access that they have, and the kind of health choices that they're able to make for other physical problems. It affects all of that. So because if you are suffering from mental illness, the likelihood of you being able to even report anything else goes down. I was just looking at some reports from Bihar with some work that has been done by our partners there, and it showed that 20% women reported that some kind of mental illness. And if you combine that with the number of men who would have similar problems, it's almost 40% of the adult population that we're talking about. And that's 30 million people in just one state of India. That's scale for a problem. I mean, I think that's larger than the total number of people affected by HIV ever in India. So that's the kind of scale that we're talking about. And I think changing that, because it's a problem that's rooted in deep social norms, and I just want to take a minute to talk about social norms because it's really critical to understand how norms work. There are two types of norms. One is, how do I perceive others? And, what's my perception of what other people do in society? And that's typically what becomes normal, because society is all about normality. Normal is accepted, abnormal is, feared, it's shunned. You want to resist the abnormal. So so that's one kind of social norm. The other is, how do people perceive me and my actions? And that's more about how, what will people approve of me? And unfortunately, mental illness falls in the category of abnormal. So both in terms of how people perceive others, and if you look at the kind of data that's coming up, it's really negative. So the kind of terms that are used is pagal, crazy, mad, unstable, etc. So that's the language that has been created around mental illness, and that makes us feel that it's something that's not normal. And as a result, we also feel that people will judge us if we have any kind of mental illness, starting from depression to something far more clinically, like clinical depression, etc. So I would be afraid to, and that causes self-stigma. So the first part causes stigma of how I think about others, and the second part causes self-stigma of how I feel about myself and how I don't want to get out. And as a result, I don't then seek treatment. It further perpetuates. People who would, in physical ailment would come out to support you, suddenly turn away from you at a time when you need them the most. Because, when there's physical ailment, if I say I have a headache, somebody will come, oh, let me, give you a head massage and whatever. If I say I'm having a depression, people want to kind of stay away from me. So it actually turns your closest friends into, people who turn away from you. And I think just to get back to the point about scale, I think what it requires, social norms don't change by telling people that, hey, don't have the stigma. Because, I actually saw this once in Africa. I was traveling and I saw this signboard that said, stop the stigma. And I was like, but I'm not causing it. So it won't change by that. What you have to do is to have very sophisticated behavior change, social change campaigns that run at scale. You need to change the lingo that is used in popular culture, in media, in social media, in films, in television, and you need to change the narrative in the public arena of how we talk about mental illness. And only then, I think people over time will start to realize that this is something that's normal, it's not abnormal. And I think that's the stage that we need to reach using these large-scale social normative shift programs.
Thank you, Mr. Swarup. I think that's absolutely right. I was just observing kids at play the other day, and you notice that one of the earliest forms of abuse, they say is pagal ho tum. It seems this stigma, this fear, seems to be so much a part of us, that it starts so early in life. And you're absolutely right. We need very smart campaigns so that there's a shift at every level. And of course, it's important for families, and we've talked about that, about how important families are, what an important role they play in normalizing what's happening. If you turn around to your family, you have you're going through depression, anxiety, and your family looks at you and says, we don't accept this. This is not even legitimate in our eyes. How much more isolating would that be? How alone would a person feel? And I think a person who's talked to many families, at various stages of their dealing with mental health issues is Anna Chandy in your work. Anna, what have you seen at a clinical level? How does stigma and lack of awareness play out when they come and meet you as a counselor? What are your thoughts about family, and how can we drive change at that level?
I think in my experience, the family takes a long time to come to terms and accept that there is a member of the family who's suffering from some form of mental illness. So they start off by denying it. A lot of them become very aggressive with the therapists or the doctors when they share their assessment and diagnosis. So I actually, the way I work with people is I do what we call systemic work, and that is you work with both the person who's been suffering and with the families, of course the psychological work that you do, because I come back to what I shared in the context setting. I think inherently we are collectivist and we are systemic, and a lot of the Western individualistic approaches may not work. We need to work as a collective. And I think to start working at the collective, I think is to first start working at the baseline collective of the family as the first collective that then belongs to a larger collective.
Yeah, that's a very good point you've raised, that India is not like the West. We have a different way of relating to others. As you rightly said, our identities are not just about ourselves, it's how we are perceived in society and how we connect with other people. I think there are two forces though, right? When you look at, say, a collectivist country like Japan, which is also capitalistic, we find pretty high rates of mental illness there, you know, because if social norms are that you have to be a productive member of society and your self-worth is judged by the amount of money you're making or how successful you are, and if that's the social norm, then even if it is a collectivist society, we still have that sort of stigmatization when a person who's going through a mental health problem cannot be productive, and now they have to deal with that kind of stigma as well. So I think that is definitely going to be a challenge. What is the right message? How do we deal with this? I think what is absolutely clear, and we have all agreed that firstly, awareness is very, very central. If you don't acknowledge a problem, if you don't know it exists, if you're not using the right language to describe the problem, then we cannot solve the problem. So obviously awareness is very important. Secondly, of course, getting rid of stigma so that people have no shame in going and seeing a physician. These two things are very important. But what thoughts do you have from our report and from your own experience? What kind of message can increase awareness? How do we actually, at a granular level, solve this issue? And any other thoughts that you might have? Let me have you, Dr. Pathare, weigh in on that first.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things that we really need to think of doing. If you look, let's take the example of some other sectors like HIV, for example, okay? The HIV sector faced the same issues, stigma, discrimination, and they were very successful at reducing that. And really the reason for that is very clear. It's the people living with HIV who took the leadership in coming out, talking about it and reducing it. So one of the lessons from HIV for us in the mental health sector is the drive towards reducing stigma will have to be led by people living with mental illness. It can't be led by professionals like me. I can support, I can do a lot of things, but ultimately it'll have to be led by them. And that actually ties in very well with research. Internationally, the one way of reducing mental health stigma has been increased contact with people with mental illness. That's the one thing that causes cognitive dissonance and people change their opinion. You could run lots of fancy campaigns and it will not work as well as contact with somebody who has mental illness. And contact doesn't have to be like, personal, individual contact. Contact can also be through virtual senses, through the media. But that contact is what makes a huge difference. So I think we have to ensure that more contact, so the kind of stuff that you've been doing, increasing more contact, people with we need to see people with mental illness out there, seen to be doing things and being successful. In UK, for example, Ruby Wax talking about mental illness on national primetime television did much more to reduce stigma than a lot of campaigns maybe run by the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Alistair Campbell, who was the advisor to the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, coming out and talking about his depression, or Stephen Fry talking about depression. I think that has had a huge impact in reducing stigma. The Norway Prime Minister resigning, saying, I'm going to go and get myself treated and come back and become a Prime Minister again. I think that kind of implies people living successfully with mental health problems. And I think that is something we should be promoting in all our ways to try and reducing stigma. The other thing that we need to concretely do is Stigma doesn't arise just out of nothing. The fact of the matter is that in this country, if you are diagnosed with having mental illness, then you stand to lose a lot of stuff, okay? There is discrimination. So stigma is an attitudinal thing, but discrimination is societal behavior. And we need to address behavior, because if we don't address behavior, we will not do anything about society. You know, I'll give you an example of the kind of behaviors that come up. The Reserve Bank of India about 2 years ago had come out with an advisory to banks, which basically said if you have a mental illness, then you should have a guardianship order for these people. Which means the minute you have mental illness and you're diagnosed with mental illness, you're not going to be in control of your finances. The guardian is going to control your finances. And we had to really actively lobby with them and say, this is discriminatory, you can't do this, and you get it off. Give you lots of examples. The Hindu Marriage Act, for example. If you have a diagnosed mental illness, your spouse can demand a divorce on the grounds of that mental illness. I mean, that's completely discriminatory. We don't do that for other things. Why should mental illness be different if it's a health problem? So discrimination is something that we really need to tackle on an active basis. Discrimination in law, discrimination in policies, discrimination in services. That's the second thing that we can concretely do. The third important concrete thing that we do need to do is language. You know, you brought it up you said lingo needs to be addressed. I think addressing the language-related issues is extremely important. The language you use makes connections. And I'll give you an example because, you know, to illustrate my point. When people talk about suicide, they say he committed suicide, okay? Normally, you use the word he committed for crime. Yeah, he committed a crime. I mean, the word committed is used for crime. Now, committed is being used for suicide, which kind of makes sorts of linkages in people's minds which are inappropriate. And committed implies that people had agency and did it purposely with some vested interest in mind. So the language we use makes a difference. And we need to be very careful of the kind of language that we use. I mean, there's no point us just shouting at the media, because I know the media doesn't always do a great job, but I don't blame the media for it. We are equally guilty of using terrible language in our speech. And secondly, very often the media does it unknowingly. I don't think that the bias in the media is a knowing bias. I think it's an unknowing bias, and I think what it requires is for us to actively engage with the media and to try and get them to also see the world from our point of view. You also, if you talk to journalists, you realize the kind of pressures they are under when they're doing things. So I think these are the three things to really do: address discrimination, address the issue of language, and the third and most important thing is increase contact with people with mental illness, especially successful people with mental illness. Just changes the narrative around mental illness.
Thank you. That's really insightful, very, very helpful. And you can see how it perpetuates itself when there's stigma. A successful person, and we know that there are many successful people who have a diagnosed mental illness, and that's been from time immemorial, you know. But because of stigma, a lot of successful people don't have the courage to speak out. And so that perpetuates the issue, and people suddenly, you know, don't know that success and having a mental illness is perfectly compatible. The other point you raised, I think, so important, which is language. And how does society frame these issues? How do they speak about it? What vocabulary do they use? And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. The media plays a very, very critical role. And so we're delighted that, of course, the media is here. They've been very supportive of the cause. And I think it also is our role to reach out to the media to help them understand, you know, what this is about. For example, when you report suicide, you know, we don't want to go exploring the cause of suicide, for example. You know, we want to understand that suicide, the real cause is mental illness that was probably undiagnosed and untreated, and that was the real cause. So language is a really important tool. Siddharth, can I get your thoughts on that? I think that's what you alluded to earlier as well, that language is important. In your work, you've seen that that's so important in making social change. Can you share your thoughts about how do we change the vocabulary? What kind of vocabulary should we use? How do we, on the one hand, be scientific, because after all there is a science to this, and yet not use pejorative clinical terms that make this about us versus them, which unfortunately is the situation with mental illness. How do we frame this?
Yeah. So I think the language issue is really critical, because if you think about it, for physical ailments, if someone has a headache, anywhere in the world they are, no matter what age they are, typically they're able to say, I have a headache. And the other person understands, right? With mental illness, the symptoms itself are very hard to describe. In fact, there's a study by Kyleman and Associates, which actually shows that in some of the rural areas, people were describing things like depression as ants crawling up my head. Now, what does that mean to me as someone who's listening to that, right? It's very scary. So the language that is used to both describe the people, like pagal, crazy, whatever, and the language that's used to describe the symptoms are both scary, and that's what creates fear. So I think there are, and I just want to kind of pick on the HIV example that Dr. Sumitra was giving, because I have this unbelievable story of stigma that's shocking. So about 15 years back, many of you would know there was PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS Relief, which gave out billions of dollars on HIV-related work. And one of the, and I don't want to name the person, but one of the very critical people within that setup from the government of US, managing billions of dollars of fund, was visiting Ethiopia, and we were taking him around, and we were doing things, showing him things like how creative circus and theater, etc., can be used for addressing the issue of HIV and creating awareness and reducing stigma. And he was very uncomfortable about it. And he said, I don't like this idea. I think we should create fear. Because when we create fear, people will disengage from the activity and therefore, or use safe practices, and therefore we'll be able to stop HIV. And we were shocked by his, by that statement. Anyway, after that, he had to meet a few people with HIV, shake hands, etc. And later on, there was another event, and he was pacing up and down at the back while that event was going on. So, and Brad Pitt was also there. Were like quite a few celebrities were there. So I had to go and manage him to see what's wrong. And I went at the back and I said, sir, what's wrong? So he said, is there a washroom? I just shook hands with people living with HIV, and I have to wash my hands. Now that's a person who's managing billions of dollars of funding on HIV. So fear is the number thing that we need to change. And the language has to change from something that people fear to something that people understand, because misunderstanding creates fear. So when you say ants are crawling in my head, people don't understand it and it creates fear. So I think that's the kind of, and then there is the narrative itself. I think there are some serious movies that have been made about issues of mental health, and there are some people who go and like it, but some people feel, it was too heavy, and I had gone for entertainment and I didn't really enjoy it. But then there are other movies that have a very light approach to it, right? So for example, English Winglish dealt with the idea of a woman who was depressed and had low self-esteem, but without really, and showed the complete turnaround in that woman without necessarily showing it as something very serious to be scared of. Similarly, Piku, while it may seem that it dealt with the issue of bowel movement, it actually dealt with a very serious problem in India of elderly care. And I think it switched the idea of elderly care from being perceived as a burden to something that's a meaningful relationship, a happy journey. And I think that's the kind of narrative shift we need, which takes away the seriousness, the fearful factor of it, and turns it into something absolutely normal. It happens to everyone. I think that's what's really required in popular culture.
Thank you. I think that's really, really helpful and very insightful that we... Siddharth, I'm sorry, Dr. Putari, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that that's exactly, and the normalization is what we need. Mental health is not purely a health issue. To my mind, mental health is a development issue. Mental health is a social issue. We should be capitalizing on some of these global things. The notion of sustainable development goals. We are not going to achieve sustainable development goals if we are going to leave people with mental illness behind. I mean, that's something that we should be pushing for very actively. But I totally agree with you that normalization in our language, normalization in our behaviors is probably what we need. We run a program in rural Gujarat which runs across a whole district and covers 1 million people. What we've found is in our entire program, we actually don't call it a mental health program. We don't use the term mental health at all in our program. We say that this deals with stresses of day-to-day living. This is the kind of stuff that all of us go through, you go through, I go through, and we talk about that. So while we actually do mental health work, we don't necessarily get into labeling it as a mental illness or mental depression, and we still provide them with therapy and counseling, but we don't kind of do that. So I think normalizing our language language and our attitudes is probably what is required.
No, I think that's also a very good point. You know, this distinction between physical illness and mental illness is totally artificial. You know, as a specialist in internal medicine and psychiatry, you know, I see this all the time, that people with diabetes have depression, people with depression have diabetes, the brain and the body are one. And so this distinction that this is totally different from physical illness is totally incorrect, and it's a flaw of the vocabulary or the limitation of the language we use. Anna, as the chairperson of the foundation, now that we've seen this report, how does that inform our activities as a foundation? What can you take away from this report? What does it say about the work that we've done so far and the work that we still have to do?
I'd really like to start by saying that what really shocked me and impacted me when the data came, and that's in connection with awareness. I am from Bangalore, so I was really shocked when I read the responses from Bangalore. There is some awareness, and yet there was so much anger against people with mental illness. So that really shocked me. It shocked me because Bangalore is one of the cities where there is a lot of support for illnesses, you know, mental illnesses. And there are a lot of doctors and there are a lot of therapists. So somewhere I was really taken aback. Coming back to the report and the work that the foundation we're doing, I think to me it struck me that the foundation is on our path is right, and that's a good thing. But what also struck me is that maybe not just TLLF, but other organizations working in the field of mental health, that we need to actually look at, as I shared, inculcating collectivist approaches in part of both raising awareness and decreasing stigma. And, just before we started that conversation I had with you, Saumitra, where you actually said that we need to be really strong when people are discriminatory, because the other part is the attitudes. Attitudes is much more long-term work. I think having an attitude is very separate from being discriminatory, and I think we need to do that. And I think discrimination we can deal with the issue of discrimination, again, how people discriminate through media and other forms of education. So I think all of us, not just the foundation, all of us working in the field of mental health, we need to work more collaboratively and more cohesively in really shaping the future conversation with regard to mental health.
Thank you, Anna. So clearly, awareness building is extremely important. This underlines the fact that we have a long way to go. However, while we've made some inroads, there's still work to be done. And as we continue our work to increase awareness and decrease stigma, that will make a huge difference in mental health in this country. So now I'd like to open this up for questions, and my colleague Brian Carvalho will take this forward. We'll invite questions from the audience, and we'll answer your questions.
We've already received some very interesting ones.
I just wanted to make one point before we...
Sorry, Brian.
Can I just make one point before we proceed?
Yes, please.
I think one critical thing that should be taken up, whether by this foundation or by others and collectively by us, is the fact that mental illness is still not a high priority public health challenge for the country. If you look at the resources that are allocated to maternal and child health, nutrition, family planning versus mental illness, it's nothing. It's zero to, whatever. And I think given the strong evidence around the relationship between mental illness and everything else in a person's life, including all other health issues, I think there's an advocacy task to be done with the donors, with the government, to say that, hey, here's an issue that affects a very large majority of people and the people around them. You know, like if my wife is feeling depressed, it affects me, it affects my child, and so on and so forth. And then it starts affecting, it has a, you know, rollover effect. So I think that advocacy task is something that really needs to be taken up.
That's a fantastic point. I mean, if you think about it, this is a problem that's solvable. This is not a problem that's unsolvable. If we have the awareness and the funds, we can make a huge difference. And so I think you're absolutely right, both from government as well as from donors alike. It's important that we have plenty of support for this. Thank you. Ryan, over to you.
Yeah. So the first question, first set of questions is from Tripti and Reshu from India TV. And I think this is meant for the clinicians on the panel. If depression in a person is not addressed on time, does it reach a level that makes it untreatable? And do doctors sometimes underdiagnose mental illness?
So the question is, do doctors sometimes underdiagnose depression and mental illness? And two is, if it's left untreated, will it lead to, can it be difficult to treat? Well, firstly, I think it's important to remember that depression and anxiety, there's a broad spectrum, and it really has its inception in stress. And we know that 50% of people living in cities have significant stress, but very few of us actually do anything about it. So when you look at intervention, yes, it's preferable that we start really early so that everyone makes stress management a part of their life. But no matter what the stage is, it's better late than never. I mean, seek help, because even if it's at a late stage, we do have treatments that can help people, that we can use to treat depression. Do doctors underdiagnose depression? Well, it depends on which doctor you're talking about, meaning it depends on the specialist. So what we know is that perhaps some general practitioners, and this has been our experience, that the awareness of mental illness is unfortunately not high enough even amongst medical professionals. You know, when you do MBBS, you get 2 weeks of psychiatry. A lot of people bunk that, to be honest. So yes, we need a lot more awareness across the medical community, and in fact, that's something that we are doing as a foundation. We are reaching out to general practitioners to raise awareness. And in the United States and many countries now, it is mandated that every adult be screened once a year for depression. Just like you check your cholesterol, you check your blood sugar, every individual needs to be checked for depression. It is that common, and we can intervene at a very early stage. So we hope to reach that level in our country where, one, there's no stigma in the community, two, there's a high level of awareness amongst medical professionals, and we are screening for depression so that we can treat it early enough. Having said that, if someone has depression, they haven't sought help, they can go at any stage, and we have effective treatments for depression.
Anything to add, Dr. Shamita?
I mean, I kind of fully agree with all that you said. The couple of things that I would like to add is that, doctors are extremely uncomfortable around conversations around mental health issues. You try talking to your doctor about something that you're feeling disturbed about, and you'll see, interestingly, the doctor changes the topic onto something else. So that lack of comfort that doctors have is probably a very important factor. So if you're going to address that, then we need to actually improve the training and the comfort level that doctors have about talking about difficult issues. The other thing that doctors probably have discomfort about comes also from the fact of feeling that there's not much I can do for this person. You know, even if they had a mental health problem, I can't do anything. So this kind of therapeutic nihilism that exists around it. And the third thing that I'm really afraid about as we go around doing our awareness is that we kind of say diagnose and treat kind of thing. My worry is that diagnose and treat will just end up that we will end up dishing out lots of pills to everybody and anybody for what might be just ordinary day-to-day life problems. So while yes, you want to do something, you also want to be careful that it doesn't result in a situation where people who have ordinary distress about something that may be relational, for example, because they meet criteria for depression, and here's a prescription, please go home and take these pills and you'll be wonderful. So I think we need to be very careful how we handle this, otherwise the potential cure might turn out to be worse than the problem we are trying to solve.
Sure, thank you. This question is from Deepika again from India TV. How difficult was it for you to accept or acknowledge that you needed help? And what role does social media have to play in disturbing your mental peace, if at all? Yeah.
I think just listening to the discussion, I think there's just two things I wanted to clarify. When we were talking about more celebrities coming out and speaking, and we were talking about the stigma, there's also a misconception that depression happens to people who are successful. And I want to clarify that that is a myth. It can happen to anybody from any field with various social, economic backgrounds. So there is a perception that it happens to people who are successful. It is sometimes perceived as a luxury. It is perceived as people who have too much. It happens to people who have too much money or have too much time on their hands. And I think it's very important for us to break that myth. Also, just to clarify to the earlier question, that when we talk about doctors probably not being interested and maybe changing the topic, I just wanted to clarify that we're talking about general practitioners, while there is a difference with general practitioners and psychiatrists. So there is a difference. So what we're trying to say is that it's the general practitioners who may not be fully aware of mental health or mental illness, but obviously a psychiatrist would do that very, very effectively, or even a counselor for that matter. Coming back to the question that I was asked.
How difficult was it to acknowledge that you needed help?
It wasn't difficult at all, to be honest. I think for me, I went through a couple of weeks of not understanding what I was going through, and it required for me to reach out to professionals, two of them who are sitting here on stage, Anna and Sham. It was their intervention that sort of made me realize what I was experiencing. And I think for me, that was half the battle won. It was important for me to understand, why do I have that pittish feeling in my stomach? Why do certain thoughts come to my head? And I think the day I felt they had explained that I had clinical depression, I think for me, I felt like a huge weight had lifted off my shoulders, just the fact that I understood what I was experiencing. So I don't think it was difficult in sort of understanding what I was going through or seeking help for that matter. The second part of the question
And the last one was about social media. Does it disturb your mental peace? I think the context is you're the most followed Indian celebrity on Instagram, and therefore the question for you.
No, I think because I think I understand the correlation between consumption of social media and mental health. Maybe because I've experienced depression. It could be that. It could be the fact that I work so closely in the field, and it could be my awareness levels. But I always believe that whatever you consume, you should consume in moderation. So yes, it is something, if you consume too much, could have various sorts of, I'd say, impact on not just your mental health, but maybe your physical health as well. I know people who are up on social media, into the wee hours, probably eating into their sleep time. So yes, I think as long as anything that you consume, whether it's social media or otherwise, is done in moderation, and you're aware about your physical health and mental health, I think you're on the right path.
Great, thanks, Deepika. This next one is for Dr. Sham. What do you think is the biggest stigma someone faces when dealing with mental health issues?
The biggest difference is that when you think of a physical illness and say you have diabetes or high blood pressure, or you get a wound, nobody ever feels, either you or the other person never feels that you yourself have been changed. But that's where mental illness, mental health is different, because we have a very different relationship with our mind. And for most people, they feel that if there's something different in my mind, myself, my identity itself has been changed, And as we've discussed earlier, that means somehow I'm different from everybody in society. And as human beings, as a species, we've evolved to desire approval from everybody else. And this actually, the desire for approval has been shown by research to be higher in India and collectivist societies compared to other societies. So we have this desire to be accepted, to be normal, etc. And I think the problem with mental illness, or the sort of notion of it, is that it strikes at the heart of this, that if I have this, I am now somehow different from the rest of society. I am excluded. I'm not part of normal mainstream society. And that is why I think it's so stigmatizing. And therefore, all the awareness work we need to do, all the destigmatizing efforts we have been doing, is really addressing this issue. I mean, ever since Deepika had the courage to speak out, I think one clear indication was, look, it can, I relate to this, that I'm not abnormal if I have depression, if I have anxiety. It can happen and does happen to many people in this country. And I think that we should continue that work so that people understand that someone with mental illness is not someone, it could be me potentially, it could be my brother, my sister, my child, and it probably will be, because it affects every family. And I think once everyone understands this is as common as anything else, it's treatable, it doesn't change the essence of who you are, I think we would have won the battle against stigma.
It's a great message. This one is for Anna Sunalini Matthew from The Hindu. Do you feel speaking about specific conditions will help identify and accept them better? And I think it resonates with some of the findings in our report.
I think so. One of the things that I consciously do to normalize mental health issues or severe issues is to encourage the people who see me that it's okay to talk about it. And very often they want to know my story or aspects of my personal life. So I think that's one thing that I do encourage to normalize. And yes, it's okay to talk about issues that can bring about mental illness, and especially severe traumatic issues. Yes, I do think, and I also come from a space where some of our current I believe that some of our current social issues like domestic violence, child sexual abuse, they impact and they do cause trauma which show up later on. So while these are social issues, I think they're connected to what we are talking, that they bring about impact on the mind.
Sure. Thank you. Anyone you'd like to add? Yeah.
Add one thing to the stigma question. I think one of the big problems, when you have a heart problem, typically people sympathize with you, right? And I think the issues where there's stigma, for example, HIV is where people blame you.
Correct.
So they tell you it's your fault, you had sex, therefore you have HIV, or you have, you're not thinking straight. So basically you have depression because you're wrong, as opposed to it being a problem. And to me, that's the most stigmatizing thing. That's what actually perpetuates it far more than anything else, because people just are dismissive. And when you're going through that feeling and you're dismissed, it's probably the worst thing that can happen to you.
Correct, yeah. Siddhartha, actually this segues to the next question. How do you think mental health education can trickle down to the grassroots? Because that's where that's an area where education begins and is necessary from NDTV.
I mean, there's no one answer to this, because I think this needs to be a multi-sectoral effort. One, if you look at science education, we are all educated biology, but biology barely touches on the subject of mental health and mental illness. So I think one is the whole education component of it. But then I think if you're talking about behavior change and social normative communication, I think there are a lot of different means to get the information out there. I think we've very effectively used, for example, mobile phones as a means to reach out to people using entertainment, education methods. Mass media is there. But then, of course, there are other things like the street theatre. There's another very interesting thing happening in India. There's a huge movement of self-help groups of women, right? And I think Bihar is planning to have about 1 million of them. UP is planning to have about 1.2 million of them, which is going to cover almost 70 to 80% of the women in the state. And that can be a great platform to start conversations about things like mental health, because even if 2 out of those 12 women in the group are suffering from some kind of depression or mental illness, it's a great support system that is now available for women around the country. So I think there are platforms that can be used to take the awareness and education right down to the grassroots level.
Yeah, I'd like to add on here, yes, in continuation of what you were saying, in Davangere, we do use the ASHA workers, in fact, as they not only educate the local people, they also encourage and support them to actually take physical, consult on Tuesdays, which is the day that people with mental illnesses can come to the PHC, the Primary Healthcare Center. The other thing that the ASHA worker, which is again community service, is they are also now with practice, slowly they're able to identify. When they do the house-to-house visits, they're able to identify people who probably need psychiatric evaluation.
Great, so it's really, go ahead.
Just wanted to pick up from what you said, Siddharth, and make a point. I think where should you, how do you do mental health education? Then I think, paraphrasing Eleanor Roosevelt, she said that about human rights. Where does it start? Then I think it starts in small places, beginning from the home. I think if we are going to actually make mental health education a reality, that's where we need to start from. And the other thing is that if we want to scale up, we don't need to think big, we actually need to think small. We need to be going to those small places. So, getting the ASHA workers to do something or getting the self-help groups to be talking about mental health, that's small stuff. We in our program, we work with these self-help groups where we train these women, and we've been using mobile phones, so these films which were specially designed and acted, and they don't provide a solution, but they actually get a conversation going, and we call it narrowcasting. So we don't broadcast, we narrowcast. This whole idea of go small, and small is good, and small actually gets you to scale much better. So I think we need to kind of change that whole paradigm of big doesn't have to be in your face, but actually can be very small in small places.
Small but impactful.
I agree. Check. Yeah, I also think one thing very strange about our educational system is that we have physical education, but we have nothing for emotional intelligence. When we know that that's going to determine the child's future in every way, whether it's success or happiness. So I think it's vital that school curriculum starts integrating emotional intelligence as part of their curriculum. And we have made some efforts as a foundation to do the school program, You're Not Alone, where we are teaching teachers and students about emotional intelligence. So that's
fantastic.
important too.
Great points. Here's a question I really like, with some honesty. Nayanika Singhal from India Today. Anxiety is normal. Being upset about a lot of things is normal. Like, this is her first press conference as a journalist, and she had butterflies in her stomach before entering here. Is that a sign of depression? How do people know the symptoms?
Firstly, thank you for sharing that. I think that's so refreshing, and your candor is really refreshing, because this is the real conversation we want, where people acknowledge that, look, having some anxiety is part of being human, and in that sense, you totally relate to what we call clinical conditions. No, you don't have a disorder. It's very common to have butterflies in the stomach. I think we all do as well. Part of being human, so not a disorder at all. And I think that's important too, that we don't want to pathologize sadness. We don't want to pathologize, we don't want to call sadness abnormal or anxiety abnormal. The richness of the human experience is that you have joy, you have pain, you have sadness, you have fear, and all of that. And that's what makes us so beautiful as human beings. And that's certainly not what we are doing. What we are saying though is that certain symptoms, when the sadness becomes totally different, and the sadness of depression is quite unlike the sadness, everyday sadness that we all experience. So it's important to draw that distinction between everyday sadness and anxiety and something that we call clinical.
Yeah. Ananya from Financial Express wants to understand a bit more about the impact. She says, while the Vishaka guidelines ensure that sexual harassment is penalized at workplaces, do you think there should be a similar clause for mental harassment that affects one's efficiency and productivity? Any one of you?
So first, the Vishaka guidelines was, we have now the Act. So that's important to realize that the Act has come April 2017. I think when you say that should we have an Act for you need to be specific of what the act is for, because there are several acts for it. And what are we saying? Are we saying that we want an act for what? Because we need to be specific about that.
Yeah, I think she says that she's looking for a clause for mental harassment that affects one's efficiency and productivity.
Okay, workplace harassment.
That's right, in the workplace.
Okay. So I think that's something there is in the pipeline. It's not fully done, is it? No, so much it's not. No, it's in the pipeline, but it's not yet out. But there is workplace harassment in the pipeline. Workplace harassment in relationship to women, it's already in place.
I don't think we need, we should try and, first of all, let me say that the law is a hammer, and if you see every problem as a nail, then you start looking for a hammer. So I think there's a limitation to how much law can solve everything that you face. At the same time, the second issue is that we have plenty of laws. And it requires us to creatively use a lot of the existing provisions in existing laws to deal with it. So every single problem does not require a new set of legislation. I think that's the second thing that we should take into account. And the third thing is that we really live in multiple Indias. The kind of work, I'm just trying to think of a workplace harassment for somebody who works in an urban setting, in a formal job setting, where you have a job contract and you are working in a formal setting, versus the kind of workplace harassment that is, say, faced by a woman who works in a rural area, in an informal job setting, doesn't have a contract, and how does one deal with that? And clearly, the solutions that you will try to do to address these issues are going to be very, very different. The issues are also very different. So I think we need a much more broader conversation. I wish there was a 1 second soundbite answer to this. There isn't. But I think we should be much more creative in using what we already have before we say, oh, let's have one more piece of legislation.
Thank you so much. So obviously you mentioned that it's a very layered conversation and there's lots to say, lots to discuss, but we're running out of time. So I'd like to invite Danish back over. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brian. You asked those questions really well. All right. Dear panelists, I'm going to request you to please remain on stage. And let's have a round of applause for our panelists once again, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to invite Deepika up on stage to please felicitate the panelists. This is our little way of thanking you for your opinions and your time.
Save the best for last. Yes. Yeah.
So may I request you? Yeah, you can come forward. Thank you very much. I'm going to request Anna to please deliver the closing remarks. Ma'am.
Thank you, Danish. Today marks both a culmination as well as the beginning of a new chapter for us. The TLLF team first discussed the need for more research into public perception and attitude towards mental health a year ago. And over the last few months, we've had a very exciting time shaping the contours of this research initiative that we have unveiled today. As I mentioned, it's the beginning of a new chapter providing everyone in India who are interested and involved in mental health with a baseline indication. This baseline will provide the direction we need to take in driving change and shaping the conversation towards building an India that is inclusive and stigma-free. We intend to do further analysis of this data and create a toolkit for other NGOs and stakeholders who can use these findings to influence their own outreach going forward. As we conclude this event, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge a few people and organizations who have made this morning possible. Firstly, my heartfelt thanks to our respected Chief Guest, Mr. Sanjeeva Kumar, Additional Secretary, Health, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, for taking time off his busy schedule and being with us, even for a bit. We'd also like to thank the Joint Secretary, Mr. Love Agarwal, also for being here. Thanks also to Dr. Saumitra Patre and Siddharth Swarup and other panelists, and of course, my colleague, Dr. Bhatt. Thank you very, very much to our donors, those of you who are here with us, and those of you who are unable to attend. My thanks to Kantar Public, who partnered with us in this research. Thanks to our event partner, Mr. Venkat Vardhan at DNA Networks, as well as Rajesh Chandwani and his team from DNA. Thanks to our airline partner, Vistara. Thank you, Danish, for hosting this event with the panache and passion that you bring to everything that you're involved in. We are so glad you could be with us here today. Danish has been traveling internationally and just made it to Delhi last night. Last but not least, thank you to my young team at TLLF for your commitment and also for challenging my beliefs, ideas, and thoughts every day. You have worked very hard to put this event together. Thank you to Deepika and my colleagues on the board for continued support. And thank you to all members of the press for not only being here, but also for supporting us in all our endeavors. Your support is warmly and sincerely received by us at the Foundation. It's back to you, Danish.
We've just heard so many thank yous. Somebody has to thank you also, no ma'am. So thank you. Let's have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, and with that, we come to the end of this wonderful morning. If you look at the back, there's the screen that's going to go up, and then lunch will be served. So please do enjoy your meal and have a great weekend. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.